My sermon this morning is the passionate commitment of God, and it's built on Isaiah chapter 9. I'm going to start reading in the last part of 8 because it kind of draws it all together. Isaiah chapter 8, starting at the 19th verse. A new set of glasses too, and focal length is different. When someone tells you to consult a medium or a spirit who whispers and mutters, should not a people inquire of their God? Why consult the dead on behalf of the living? Consult God's instruction and the testimony of warning. If anyone does not speak according to this word, they have no light. They have no light of dawn. Distress and hunger, they will roam through the land. When they are famished, they will become enraged, and looking upward, they will curse their king and their God. And they will look downward to the earth and see only distress and darkness and fearful gloom, and they will be thrust into utter darkness. Nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who were in distress. In the past, he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the future, he will honor Galilee of the nations by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light, and those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. You have enlarged the nations and increased their joy. And they rejoice because as your people rejoice at the harvest, as a warrior rejoices when he's dividing the plunder. For as in the day of Midian's defeat, you were shattered the yoke of the burden on them, and the bar across their shoulders, and the rod of their oppressors. Every warrior's boot used in battle, and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, and will be fuel for the fire. For unto us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. May the Lord bless this his word. I want to tell you about one of my most unlikely friends. His name was Jeff. We were in grade school together. His parents owned a local dry cleaners just down the street from us. I say unlikely because Jeff was the guy who got 95% in school, and I was the guy who got 60%. He was athletic, and I was the last pick. He was tall and skinny, and I was short and pudgy. But we lived in the same side of the distance from school, and we walked together to school every morning. For about 8 years, at least. He graduated 2 years before me, and he got a good job as a chartered accountant. The death notice read, he suffered from depression all his life and finally ended it. Distress, darkness, no hope, suicide. Did you know that suicide has become the leading cause of death among teenagers? It's on the increase. Doctors say the causes are increased nervous tension. That's distress. Inability to see desirable solution. That's darkness. an attitude of despair. That's a lack of hope. Isaiah wrote, distress and hunger, they will roam through the land, and they will, when they are famished, they will become enraged and look upward, and they will curse their king and their God, and they will look towards the earth and see only distress, darkness, and fearful gloom, and they will be thrust into utter darkness. Utter darkness. Isaiah wrote those words 4,000 years ago, but he could have wrote it to our society today. He was writing to a society that was post-religious. He was writing to a society suffering from moral degradation, sexual perversion. That is. He was writing to a society full of social injustices. He was writing to a society that was full of religious hypocrisy. Much the same conditions as the world we live in today. I believe this morning that in a world of despair, you can live with joy by recognizing the gift of hope available to you through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Let's begin. Number one, the need for a promise. This was very depressing because I had to research this all this week. Where do people turn during a crisis? Well, you know that our world right now is in a crisis unlike anything that we've experienced since World War II. It's worldwide. The COVID news on Thursday mentioned that our Prime Minister tells us that there likely to be a delay in Canada getting a COVID-19 vaccine, but that everybody will be vaccinated by September of 2021. Although Canada used to be a world leader in vaccine production, it seems right now that we have no domestic vaccine production facilities in Canada. We will depend on the United States, Great Britain, Germany, and Spain to get our vaccine for this. All of those countries have worse outbreaks than we do, so you can imagine we're going to be down on the list. It was announced yesterday that for the second day in a row that Ontario had over 1,800 new cases and 21 deaths. And the prognosis is by mid-December this could reach 6,000 per day. Year to date in Canada, 350,000 cases have been reported and 11,799, well that's not correct anymore, it's higher than that, deaths have occurred. This year to date in the world, 60.9 million people have suffered this disease and 1.4 million people have died. How does that affect life? Well, we're getting used to the concept of social distancing now. I came in this morning and I looked at the organ and there was an organist there, and I remembered that all the years that I came here, the first thing that I would do would go over and hug the organist. And I couldn't do that this morning. Social distancing. The cancellation of group activities, many churches, weddings, birthdays, even Christmas is going to be diminished. The shortage of goods when we go to the store. And of course, then there's the masks. The psychological reaction in Canadians, probably around the world. Stress-related illnesses are on the climb. They're climbing rapidly. One study predicted that the suicide rate is likely to increase or can increase by as much as 145% because of COVID. Psychologists predict that in the general population there will be a tend towards panic behavior or collective hysteria. One good simple symptom of that is Just think of how many people you've heard talk about conspiracy theories. And there's a growing acceptance of all sorts of conspiracy theories. People are feeling hopeless and desperate. There's an abnormal elevation of anxiety in the general population. And much of this is leading to suicide. We are living in a world right now that is full of gloom, depression, anxiety, distress, and despair. And the scriptures say, then they will look towards the earth and they will see only darkness and distress and fearful gloom. And they will be thrust into utter darkness. We are living in that time. In this time of darkness, we need a light. Psalm 18, verse 28. Psalm 18, verse 28. You, O Lord, keep my light burning. My God turns my darkness into light. John chapter 1, verse 5. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not understood it. And then John 8, 12. John 8, 12. Oh, I knew that one off by heart. Jesus said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. The world we live in now needs this promise. They need to hear your story of how the Lord Jesus came into your life and brought the light in a time of darkness. The promise of hope. Nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who are living in darkness. In the past, he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the future, he will honor Galilee of the Gentiles. Nevertheless, I like that, no more gloom. There's hope. There's something there that we can grasp. It says in the past, God humbled. He humbled the land of Zebulun and Naphtali. Now, if you look at the maps and the biblical maps, you'll see that these are properties, or these are the lands that are directly south of Galilee and directly west of the Sea of Galilee. Basically, the Promised Land. And the reference here is to the Promised Land, Exodus chapter 33, where the inhabitants were expelled because of their sinful nature. And then it tells us that God will honor his faithful people. It points towards the honor that will come from following him, from understanding the gospel, or the light, the good news. When we turn to the Lord, he gives us answers. Leviticus chapter 26. There, starting at verse 40. But if they will confess their sins, and the sins of their fathers, and their treachery against me, and their hostility towards me, which made me hostile towards them, so that I sent them into the land of their enemies. What happens when we turn away from God? What happens when we don't acknowledge God? As it says here, he sends us into the land of our enemies. Then, when their uncircumcised hearts are humbled and they have paid for their sins, I will remember my covenant with Jacob, and my covenant with Isaac, and my covenant with Abraham, and I will remember the land. The good news? See, the good news is that God has the answer for the darkness. He has the answer for our inability to see. He has the answer for the questions that bother this world. We do not have to live in doom and gloom. You see, the secret is putting our trust in God. When we trust God for our solution, good things happen. Trust in the world, depression. Trust in God, hope and joy. I want to take you to 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 16. But whenever anyone turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away. Now that's a promise. When anyone turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away. Isaiah forecast 2,000 years before it happened that out of Galilee a great blessing would come from God. What was that blessing? That blessing was Jesus. Jesus, He's the reason for the season. He lifts the veil. He lets the light shine into our lives. He lets us be able to see the answer to the question. The promise is that our minds will be opened so that we can understand God's way. Peace will replace darkness when we are able to see from God's perspective. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 2. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light, and those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. Well, what is the darkness? I mean, just for a minute, think about what is the darkness? Well, it's the place where the world lives today. They cannot see the workings of God. They cannot see Jesus as the Messiah. They cannot understand how to be forgiven. They cannot comprehend how to find peace. They cannot communicate with God, the Creator. Life in darkness has very little meaning, and it comes with a subjection to a slavery. I got to take you back to 2 Corinthians chapter 3. But whenever anyone turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And we, who will, with unveiled faces, all reflect the Lord's glory, are being transformed into His likeness with an ever-increasing glory, which comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. God is changing things. When we turn to Him, He lifts the veil. We're able to see through the darkness. And He removes the gloom. And He replaces it with gladness. He takes away the fear and replaces it with joy. Isaiah goes on to say, "You have enlarged the nations and increased their joy. They rejoice before the people, rejoice as the people rejoice at a harvest, as men rejoice when they're dividing the plunder. For as it was in the days of Midian's defeat." Now, why did He bring the Midian's defeat here? Well, you have to think for a few minutes and go back to Numbers chapter 13, and you see the nation of Israel. They had been in captive in Egypt, and God had freed them from that and taken them and showed them the promised land, but they failed to obey God, so He sent them into the desert where they were for 40 years. And now they are coming out of the desert, and they're coming into to face the Jordan River to enter into the promised land, and there's only one problem that they face: the Midianites. You see, the Midianites saw them as future enemies, so they blocked the way of the nation of Israel into the promised land. For as in the days of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdened them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppression, every warrior's boot used for battle, and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning and fuel for the fire. At this point, you see, God sent Moses on his last assignment. And Moses took 1,000 soldiers from each of the 12 tribes, and they went and they defeated the Midianites. Not only defeated them, they literally annihilated them, wiped them off the map. It says, as he broke the yoke in the days of Midian and freed the nation of Israel to go into the promised land. That's the promise. Our sin, our guilt, it's removed. The great war against sin has been won. And that brings us to the fulfillment of the promise. And it comes as a gift. A gift that will be the governing authority that will take command of all life. We see some of it now, but yet a lot of it is in the future. For unto us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. That's who the gift is. A wonderful counselor. That's like a wise friend who gives you good advice. A mighty God. That's one who has the strength, the power to give you security. The everlasting Father. That's one who is always with you, always looking after what your best in life is, always wanting good for you. And the Prince of Peace. He's the author. He's the finisher of our lives. The writer to the book of Hebrews, he understood that. In Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2, he writes, "Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and the perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God." Our solution in the time of darkness, the fulfillment of the promise, is that God will lift the veil and bring light into our lives, that we are able to see from God's perspective. And Isaiah goes on to say, "Of the increase of his government and the peace there will be no end. It's everlasting. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding its justice and righteousness from this time on and forever." This gift that we're looking at, this hope that we have, this promise that he's given, it is an everlasting promise. And it will continue to increase. It will establish and uphold justice and righteousness, all the things we are missing in our world today. But my favorite part is verse 7. How do we know this is going to happen? How do we know all of these good things are going to come? How do we know the promise is going to be fulfilled? The New International Version says, "The zeal of the Lord God Almighty will accomplish this." I like the New Living Translation. It has the best, I think. It says, "The passionate commitment of the Lord of heaven's armies will make it happen." This is the creator of the universe. The one who made all the stars. The one who has all the power. This is the one who is going to make it happen. He's promising us this on the strength of his being. The creator of the universe. He's going to use his power to make it happen. As sure as we exist, as sure as this world exists, as sure as the stars in the solar system exist, as sure as the universe itself exists, this will happen. Are you ready for Christmas? Celebrate this gift.